It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in such a great country. University of California, Irvine. I'm going to show this one more time. My office is next to Disneyland. So please come pay a visit to us. It's a great place, Orange County. And these are some of our nephrologists. And also World Kidney Day. Please do not forget to celebrate World Kidney Day. This year was kidney disease and obesity. And next year is kidney disease in women. Very important. March 2018. So also my social media, Twitter, Kamyar Kalantar, as well as Facebook. We are one of the 3 centers of the United States Renal Data System in the United States. We look at transition of health, transition of care into CKD. I'm going to bypass in Hawaii. We look forward to seeing you 2019, next one. So review the importance of transition from CKD to ESRD or not to transition. That's the question, right? Describe importance of residual kidney function and review incremental transition, gradual transition, and why dialysis hurts more than it helps in these patients. 120,000 dialysis patients are generated in the United States every year. 120,000 new dialysis patients. As you can see, over the past 14 years, every year more patients start on dialysis in the United States. These are seasonal variations suggesting that in winter, January, February, March is like QRS, right? Like EKG, January, February, March. In January, February, March of each year, we transition more patients to dialysis in the US than summer, June, July, August, as you can see. And the transplant is the opposite. The summer is the highest and winter is the lowest. These are seasonal variation of transition. And I look forward to see seasonal variation of transition from each of your countries, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and so forth. Usually patients transition to dialysis when GFR is below 25, not 15, but 25. So they gradually start to transition according to different needs. And I use the keyword transition because the nephrology community has used for 30 or 40 years the keyword start. They say start dialysis, which has caused probably more harm to patients than anything. Your children don't start adulthood, they transition to adulthood, right? Gradually they become adult. We gradually become nephrologists. We don't wake up suddenly to become a nephrologist. So how come dialysis patients are suddenly become dialysis? In the United States and Europe and Brazil and here 3 times a week. How wrong it could be. So if you look at start could be early or it could be late, right? That's why when you start patients, then you have to fight about early versus late. If it were gradual transition, we wouldn't have had these problems. Also, there are patients who may not even benefit from dialysis. No matter how much uremic toxins they have, they are happier with those uremic toxins sitting and not ever starting dialysis. Transplant, preemptive transplant, eventually fails, and these transplanted patients, they should also transition gradually back to dialysis, not abruptly. And so you can see the entire field is all about transition. So if you look at the optimal transition, it turns out after 50 years, we do not know how to transition people to dialysis. What's the best timing? Best type? What's the impact of pre-ESRD conditions on post-ESRD outcomes? And what's the best modality, format, frequency? Who created 3 times a week? Who is here to say 5 times a week is better? And why not once a week? Why not once a month, as they do now in China? So look at now problems with start of dialysis. When you start, instead of transition patients to dialysis, you have high mortality. Mortality is the highest in the first 6 months. Very consistent in all countries. There is not even a single country you can find where mortality in the first 6 months is not. Why? Because you start patients suddenly on dialysis instead of gradually transition them, most likely. So you see, all countries in the world, they have high mortality. From Japan, where they have the lowest mortality, still the first 6 months they have the highest mortality. Transition is costly when it's start. When you suddenly start a patient to dialysis, it's very costly. It costs a lot, as you can see here. Best timing of transition, it has been questioned. When it's about start, then we don't know early versus late. So therefore, we're going to continue to struggle. And fortunately, one thing this study told us is that going according to the opinion of the defenders of dialysis, that earlier, more frequent, longer hours are better, probably is wrong. Probably there is no black and white approach to dialysis. Old people, I can talk about this for half an hour to an hour, about transitioning older people to dialysis. Sometimes all they need is once a week to once a month dialysis, if anything at all. And we should be here to talk about conservative and alternative management of kidney disease for them, like low protein diet, low salt, low protein, and many other things. So next one, transition across race. This is for United States, which is very important. There are data to believe that African American who generally live shorter than white people, when they're on dialysis, they live longer. So this is called African American paradox. So if so, then African Americans in the US probably benefit from earlier and more frequent dialysis than others. Residual kidney function, this was the one yesterday I talked for 35 to 40 minutes. It's very important. Residual kidney function overrides anything related to dialysis. If your patient has residual kidney function of 3 or 4, that's like an ocean compared to 3 times or even 5 times dialysis a week, which is like a small drop in the vast ocean of the residual kidney function. Hence, it should be our priority to maintain, to preserve residual kidney function. And as you see, the next 10 minutes, I talk about twice weekly hemodialysis, but you can do once a week hemodialysis in your country. We do twice weekly because in the US, we can't go below that. So this is one of the studies I showed yesterday, suggesting that 84% of patients, when they started hemodialysis, they still had urine. But after 1 year, it was down to 28%. And residual kidney function was associated with lower mortality, less inflammation, patient's happiness, quality of life, and everything you can imagine. Now, about incremental versus abrupt. So in the United States, sometimes I write first concepts in these journals that are read by nephrologists. And then we move to peer-reviewed journal gradually. So here in 2014, we call this infrequent dialysis, less frequent. Then we had a consensus conference. When I went to China and India, I learned from them. Instead of I forced them to do twice weekly, I went there and I saw they are doing only twice a week dialysis, similar to Mexico, for example. And we can learn from them. It's not bad to learn from emerging economies. So it's not that everything we do in the United States or Europe is correct. Sometimes it's the opposite. A lot of things that other nations do are more correct. Now, this one was an editorial to a Dobbs paper in NDT, which became the most read paper in NDT in 2014. and more papers. So now, if you look at some of the data here, so Jason, KI, AJKD, and so forth and so on, and the paper that was most read was an editorial in 2014 about let's give twice-weekly hemodialysis a chance. Let's just think about this. It's not bad, it's not inferior. It may be a good thing for most of our patients in the first 6 months to 2 years of dialysis. So when I try to understand why dialysis 3 times a week, I spoke with Dr. Christopher Black, who is one of the founders of dialysis, still alive in Seattle. And he said that dialysis was initially 2 times a week. It was initially 2 times a week. But as they were rushing to the US Congress in 1972 to get the first and last socialist medicine approved by the US Congress, they suggested twice a week. And they were hoping to suggest twice a week to get coverage for twice a week, but the US Congress covered twice a week. So it became, actually the US Congress covered 3 times a week. So therefore, dialysis became 3 times a week by virtue of some political approach. And the entire world follows usually blindly something that happens in the US or Western Europe. So now, going back to residual kidney function probably is the most important thing to target. Even if we are going to run a randomized trial of twice versus thrice weekly dialysis, probably we have to see if we can achieve preservation of residual kidney function. Now, how come for peritoneal dialysis, this is so important, right? But the moment it becomes hemodialysis, we don't even want to think about this. Why is there a disconnect? So, less frequent dialysis, it preserves your kidney function, it's smoother, it gives more freedom to your patient to come to your center twice a week, protecting AV fistula, less nutrient loss. Who is here to say that dialysis doesn't cause harm? Dialysis is medical nephrectomy. In Japan, they do daily dialysis to kill the kidneys. Frequent dialysis studies show the same. Now, let's go over some more studies. Frequent dialysis showed that daily, more frequent dialysis leads to faster loss of residual kidney function. This is studied by them, published in KI, saying very sincerely, to their credit, that more frequent dialysis means faster loss of residual kidney function. So you kill the kidneys faster. Then they published one more study in JASN, suggesting that frequent dialysis leads to damage to AV fistula. Does it make sense? Yes. Does it surprise you? No. You poke the AV fistula more often, you're causing more harm. So then we started talking about twice weekly dialysis with Chinese and Indians, because this is where 50 to 60% of dialysis patients, sometimes 80%, are twice weekly. And we came up with criteria how to convert twice weekly to thrice weekly. So probably the most important one is having good residual kidney function above 3 or 600 cc's of urine, 500 or 600 cc's of urine, as well as other things. So you can look at other criteria. And then we found that Keidoki actually said there is no reason to start 3 times a week dialysis if KRU is above 3. So if you have a KRU above 3, there is no reason to rush 3 times a week dialysis. And if KRU goes below 2, then Keidoki suggests to transition them to thrice weekly dialysis. That's this is the previous version of Keidoki. Now, among some of this, what was the reactions to all these efforts? Now, you can imagine a lot of our colleagues, they become emotional and they overreact. And when we wrote here, I think some of our colleagues here, in response, they rushed into AJKD and said that this is a dangerous thing that is happening, and we're going to stop all these efforts. So therefore, they some colleagues here, they wrote some here suggesting that this twice weekly dialysis or incremental dialysis should be stopped. There are so many other important things to do. Now, Andrew Davenport, for example, he was also initially against twice weekly hemodialysis, but to his credit, then he changed side, and then he wrote 6 months later something in defense of incremental dialysis and NDT. So now, look at here, when in the US, patients start twice weekly hemodialysis, in blue, residual kidney function lasts longer compared to 3 times a week in red. Not only residual kidney function, KRU clearance, but also urine volume is larger after 1.5 years. And as you can see here, mortality is not higher. The only time actual mortality is, if KRU is above 3, then mortality is the same or tends to be better. If KRU is below 3, then mortality is worse. So twice weekly dialysis, therefore, is not for everybody if somebody doesn't have enough residual kidney function. The next one was about residual kidney function decline and mortality. So this study shows association of KRU above 6 with the lowest mortality as compared to KRU below 1.5 with the highest mortality. So I'm going to move fast towards another study where the frequency of dialysis was looked at. Higher in this study, among 50,000 patients are divided into those who started incremental, gradual increase, conventional, and frequent. That means more than 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week hemodialysis. And what was found is that mortality of dialysis patients was the highest in frequent dialysis. In incremental or twice weekly, mortality was the same, or if anything, tends to be better. Whereas in frequent dialysis, mortality was the worst. So as you can see here, incremental 3 times a week and frequent 4 or 5 times a week, mortality is the highest. Now, of course, it doesn't mean causality, but there is something there. So here also a review about incremental, about preservation of residual kidney function in hemodialysis patients, right? In hemodialysis patients. And its importance is association with outcome and how we can help these patients to preserve residual kidney function. For example, as you can see here, 3 times versus 2 times is associated with worse preservation. You lose residual kidney function, or 6 times versus 3 times. So if you would like the kidneys to be dead, you can dialyze patients more frequently. Finally, Italians, they have been working on this protocol for some 30 years, right? To start patient on once a week hemodialysis and to give them a low-protein diet on the other 6 days. So they call this incremental transition to dialysis with low-protein diet, essentially. And as you can see here, on non-dialysis days, they have protein intake reduced. On dialysis day, there is freedom. Patients need to eat as much as possible. So we covered all these areas. Now I have only 4 minutes left to share with you some of our experience. At University of California, Irvine, we started incremental dialysis 3.5 years ago. So some of, and we have published a number of our case series. So these are the first 15 patients who started 3 to 4 years ago on twice a week hemodialysis. Sadly, as I said, we can't do once a week, but I encourage you guys to do once a week hemodialysis if possible. And here the reasons why most of them eventually between 3 months to 2 years, they transition to 3 times a week. So therefore, twice a week for these patients was not permanent. Although 4 or 5 of them still are on 3 times a week, still on twice a week after 3 years. So there are some who even interrupt their dialysis treatment to go to bathroom to urinate. So after 3 years, this is amazing. Now, one question is, what should we do with schedule? Well, guess what? Indians who are very smart, they came up with this idea. So you dialyze Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, and Wednesday, Saturday. So you can dialyze 3 patients twice a week instead of 2 patients 3 times a week. Or you can also have 5 times a week patients and use the free spot for 5 times or 6 times a week patients. So there are so many creativity that could come out of this. Now, if this is what we used to do, or we are still doing, abruptly starting patients on dialysis, incremental means you gradually start patients on once a week or twice a week, and then after 3 months or 3 years or 5 years, according to precision medicine, personalized medicine, that patient gradually transition to 3 times a week. And maybe 10 years later, patient needs 4 times or 5 times a week, and maybe 20 years later, when patient is too old or doesn't have high urea generation, then patient maybe needs only twice a week. So we have the entire spectrum from twice a week, from incremental to decremental, right? And this is personalized medicine, precision medicine. So this is my last slide. In summary, in patients with very late stage NDD-CKD, the optimal transition to kidney replacement therapy is not known. Major uncertainty still exists as to what is the best approach for your patients, different individuals, different persons, in terms of frequency, mode, type, and even hours of dialysis. I would even suggest maybe 1 to 2 hours of dialysis for the first few months is all that you need. Incremental, which currently in the US is twice weekly, but in your countries you can do once a week, is probably the superior way to transition CKD patients to ESRD in order to preserve residual kidney function longer and to achieve better quality of life and to save costs as well as resources if you have those problems. Twice-weekly hemodialysis may be a better initiation modality for most incident dialysis patients. Most of your patients still make urine, right? 80%, 90% of your patients, they make as much urine as you make when the day one when you start them on dialysis. And we need to preserve that. This is the most precious asset that a patient has, residual kidney function. And therefore, we need urgently clinical trials. I would like to encourage you, in any country you are, or different countries, create multi-center, randomized controlled trials to randomize patients to twice or once or twice versus 3 times and see what happens. Look at certain outcome measures. So with that, I would like to acknowledge great people who have worked hard while I'm writing and publishing these papers. And thank you again for inviting me here. Thank you.